Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast, brought to you by PenFed. I'm your host, Heather Lucky Penney. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. And just a note for our listeners, the views and comments from the Air Force active duty officers here on the Aerospace Advantage are their own and do not represent or reflect the views of the U.S. Air Force or the Department of Defense. It's no secret the Mitchell Institute is a huge fan of long-range strike. Global reach, global power. And you can't exercise that without Air Force bombers. So we're going to dig into that mission today with Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Duke Stillwell. We're honored to host him on our team this year as an Air Force Fellow, and he spent most of his career in the B-1, including time at the Weapons School, and he just wrapped up command of the 9th Bomb Squadron at Dyess Air Force Base. Duke, welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Lucky. It's great to be here.
Okay, so what does global reach, global power mean to you through that bomber lens, and why should people care about the bomber mission?
It's a great question. So obviously bombers can never do it alone, right? And being the only bombers in the free world, it's a very important mission for us.
Actually, I think that's a point that we really need to emphasize.
Yeah.
In terms of the free world, the Western world, the United States Air Force is the only nation that hosts bombers.
Absolutely. Yep. It's really part of that great power competition. But specifically what bombers bring, right, is mass, range, and speed. Mm-hmm. We like to talk about bombs on time, on target, anywhere in the world. Being able to hold those targets at risk for the United States, our partners and allies, as part of the joint force is really a huge component of the mission to be able to influence things around the globe and really create that deterrent effect, whether it's conventional or nuclear.
Absolutely. And I think that timepiece is also another thing that's really important because bombers can be there from the CONUS anywhere in the globe in less than 12 hours. I mean, that's really significant.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we saw that recently, right, with things like Operation Midnight Hammer, where I think 30-something hours total for the mission, but that was from CONUS and their home base to affect the targets and back, which is an incredible pace.
Okay, so maybe a little bit over 12 hours, but that's still pretty phenomenal. Yeah. Okay, so one thing that's really unique about your time in uniform is that you grew up amidst operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, so it's not unique because most of the United States Air Force was assessed post 9/11. But you fly an aircraft that was designed to fight against the Soviet Union. And now that we're focused on a return to peer competition with China as the pacing threat, talk to us about what the bomber mission was like in your early years and how it's evolved.
Absolutely. So it's representative of probably the predominance of our force, right? We capitalized in the 80s and kind of during the Cold War. Certainly what the B-1 was designed for, like you said, nuclear cruise missiles against the Soviet Union. Well, that had to evolve, and certainly September 11th woke up everybody and had to change the force, but we didn't really recapitalize the force. There was a lot of innovation and evolution. The B-1 really represents that.
Yeah.
Putting things like
targeting pods,
JDAM, targeting pod, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, who knew that B-1 was going to do CAS?
Right, and that's really what it became, right, as the primary mission, at least forward.
Yeah.
Now, there was still clearly a focus and a requirement to train on all the other mission sets, so really that became additive. So in terms of focus at home, and we'll probably talk more about that later in terms of the training, but we still had to maintain all of the other capabilities and mission sets that we had. And frankly, with that technology and those additional capabilities like JDAM, targeting pod, and standoff weapons, those became greater. But a lot of our focus obviously became about that close air support.
How did that change the mindset?
It absolutely did. For a lot of us, the deployment became the primary focus, of course. And, we were deployed for 6 out of every 18 months. We can talk more about that battle rhythm, but for the B-1, there's only 3 squadrons, right? So that became a primary focus, especially quality of life wise.
Yeah.
Yep, high demand, low density, like you said. And, there's never enough bombers, right? And we can talk about that some more. But in terms of that demand, it got to a point where the combatant commanders used to say the B-1 was kind of the insurance policy over some of those theaters, just because it did bring that mass and payload capability as well as the loiter time. And so they always wanted a B-1 overhead. Well, what does that mean with a small fleet? That means 24/7 operations, and each squadron's gone a third of the time. And so the focus became certainly on that, but that's not all we did. It just meant that was the predominance of what we had to train for and employ with.
Did that really shift the mindset of the bomber pilots and the bomber crew? Because, I've seen, you see over A-10s, they're like, never forget that the mission is an 18-year-old infantry kid, which actually is not the real mission of air power, right?
That's right.
Like if you're doing close air support, it's an emergency. Things have failed long before you ever got there. And so did that shift the mindset? Because the bombers as a strategic force, and not just talking nuclear, I'm talking about having strategic impact for operations, campaigns, and national interest. Did that shift the mindset at all for you guys? Or were you holding on to that tradition, that heritage?
It did for some, at least some of the time, right? But we all had in the back of our minds the true purpose of the bomber. In the unipolar moment, the kind of lack of threats there for a while, relative stability and peace in the world, again, relative. There were older guys and gals in the community, the older generation that had employed things like Allied Force. So that was still there in the squadron for sure. And we all knew that those missions existed and were important. And we trained them as much as we could. But guess what? When it's time to deploy and American
You're going to do what the nation needs.
Lives are on the ground. Right. So that became the most important thing in the day. But I'll say we fought our best to spend as much time as we could focus on the higher end mission sets and training towards that.
That's good. So, you mentioned about the deployments 6 out of every 18 months. What did that mean for your training readiness and the general operational tempo? How did that impact your community and the jets?
Yeah, so nothing's free, right? Everything comes at a cost. And so spend a lot of time in a combat squadron, right? It's all about how do you train, how do you absorb, how do you get better as a unit, right? You're going to obviously lose some guys and gals to assignments, retention, whatever. You're going to get a new flow in all the time. So you have to absorb those people, and then you also have to train, maintain that readiness, right? What we call it combat mission readiness all the time. Everything that is not directly in line with upgrading people is going to be a cost to that, frankly, or that high-end fight. And so kind of like the coup de grace, right, is going through obviously MQT, and in our case, you become an aircraft commando or a mission lead, and then eventually an instructor. And that takes a while to do that. Things like red flags and other large force employments are certainly helpful to that, getting people ready for things like weapons.
Because you can do upgrades during the course of that, and that really does help hone the skills, and it experiences everyone who hasn't had the opportunity to go through that kind of high-level training.
Absolutely. And, based on what we're asked to do for the nation, that's what we have to do. And and close air support became obviously very important for the nation, and so we certainly did it. It always was really a secondary mission set, though, in terms of our primary purpose. And so my point, again, in the time, very important and very proud of my work that I did there. I got to do 3 of those deployments. But we knew in the back of our heads, this isn't the purpose of the jet. And on our worst day as a nation, this isn't how the B-1 necessarily needs to be used. So that took away from training towards the primary mission sets and our primary readiness, right? And so about a 6-month deployment, well, it was a 6-month deployment. We'd spin up for that for about 3 to 4 months, and then a little bit of constitution time on the back. So you do the math and you're looking at about half of your time in the combat squadron is dedicated towards spin up, deployment, and then reconstitution from it. And it's not a 1-for-1 in terms of a readiness decrement, because you're getting hours, experience, AR, lots of other good kind of intangibles, but certainly focused on the high-end threat and the high-end mission.
That begins to decay.
Yeah, for sure.
So when did you notice that things are beginning to evolve past sort of the low-intensity era and begin to focus on the pure fight?
Great question. So we joined Global Strike, right? We were in ACC for my entire career up until 2015, and that's when I was a young weapons officer, and we moved into Global Strike Command. At about that time, and I don't know if Global Strike did it or not, it doesn't matter. But they started looking at the readiness of the jets, fatigue on the airframes, things like that.
Yeah.
And so it had just been B-1s primarily, really solely for, I think, 10 or 15 years going over there and providing that 24/7 coverage. They started to cycle in the B-52s into the Middle East mission, and then shift the B-1s to things like continuous bomber presence when that was a thing in Guam, and then other things. And we'll talk about the Bomber Task Force hopefully later, but those initially came with the BAD missions, which was my kind of first exposure to that in 2015. That stood for Bomber Assurance and Deterrence, and we'll talk about that. But that was really the shift.
I mean, bad isn't good.
Right. Yeah, I know, right? Maybe that's why they changed it. I thought they were good, but that was really the shift. Again, the wars were they were decreasing in overall scope and number of troops on the ground, certainly in that era. And it became a realization, okay, the B-1s can't do this solely and forever. And so maybe less air power is required overall, and maybe we can use some other assets to help kind of share the load.
So the switch over to Global Strike, how did that impact you from training readiness and mission focus? You already mentioned continuous bomber presence and the BAD missions, but what did you see from the unit level as a result of that MAGCOM change?
At first, it wasn't too much at a unit level, right? And the B-1 is unique and always has been. Maybe not always. We're initially a nuclear capable bomber, but due to start treating some other things, when they decertified that, we kind of became I don't know, they say redhead stepchild, maybe that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, but I liked it. We were unique in ACC because we were the only bomber, right? But conventional, and we did a lot of the red flags and things like that with them. The transition to Global Strike, again, we're a bomber, so now that makes sense from that organizational perspective, but still unique because we're conventional. And there's some different things you can do with a conventional asset that you maybe can't do with a nuclear asset in terms of access basing, overflight, things like that. So that was really good. But it really got us focused on bomber generation, bomber readiness, long-range strike, and really became a seat at the table and a voice for our primary mission, which is that global precision attack and that ability to do global strike. And so that was really important and helpful for us.
Yeah, and the ability to deny sanctuary to the adversaries and the deterrent value, even of a conventional bomber, is par none. So let's go back and talk about the continuous bomber presence missions and the bad missions.
Absolutely. So continuous bomber presence, again, that predated, I believe, me and my career out to Guam, and having jets out there in the Pacific all the time. Obviously, Indo-PACOM, PACAF is a huge fan of that, and I won't get into the politics of all that, but obviously there's an insatiable demand for bombers all the time.
Yeah,
You've had General
everybody wants them.
on, right? But there's a reality with the size of the fleet that we have, the readiness we have to maintain, fatigue on the airframes, right? B-52s are quite old, and the B-1s aren't a whole lot younger. And so how do you care for them? How do you make sure they're ready to train on for the next fight if our nation asks us to do it, while still meeting demands of not just Indo-PACOM, all the combatant commands? And so their decision was made, again, I think in the late 2010s, that we were no longer going to do continuous bomber presence there, and we'd be more agile and unpredictable. Initially, those were the bad missions, bomber assurance and deterrence, and then that really became what's called the Bomber Task Force now, which is a great name and a great mission.
Excellent. So you've led some of those missions, right? I I love to see pictures of you on the Air Force website leading some of those task force missions. And be honest, I'm jealous. It's got to be awesome to operate the bone on a global basis like that.
Yeah, getting to lead, I got to lead 3 of those Bomber Task Force missions, and the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Really just awesome. An incredible group of men and women I got to lead. Each one of those is on the order of 200 people, and it's a very complex yet rewarding experience, and it's really important. The reason I bring up they were called bad missions is just to kind of call out the real purpose of them, right? Yeah. So we're assuring our allies and partners, and we're deterring our adversaries, and that's really important. And again, being the only bombers in the free world, right? If you're not a fan of partnering with Russia or China, the United States and the bombers that we have are it.
It's a security umbrella. I mean, we're able to do things that our allies cannot do.
That's right. Yep. And 1/3 of the nuclear triad, really the most visible and signal capable part of that. But even for us in the B-1 on the conventional side, to bring that mass and to partner with them. And so we had demands really made of 8th Air Force and Global Strike for bombers all over the world, of course. So how do we fit into that? And we get tasked into those. But our ability to fly anywhere, and by the way, we train for these, I won't tell you how long in advance, but it's on kind of a varying scale depending on what's going on in the world. And that becomes a part task trainer for us as well in the bomber community. And so when you see things like when the B-1s from Ellsworth that launched out of Dyess and struck targets in Syria after Tower 42 got struck. When you see things like Operation Midnight Hammer or even Absolute Resolve, it's not publicly released where those jets came from, and I won't speculate, but these part task trainers that we do in things like bomber task forces allow our units to train, integrate, figure out the processes to optimize them so that when we are called at a moment's notice and it has to be quick, like we talked about, the point of the bombers, right, to affect targets quickly, we have a lot of those things in place. So we've gone to those bases, we've worked those diplomatic clearances, and we know how to deploy our forces.
And also, you know how to plan for it. Your folks are ready to be able to respond quickly to that. And they understand those transatlantic or trans-Pacific operations. And as you said, you've got the DIB clearances, you've got the relationships, you've got the basing agreements and everything that you need to be able to do that rapid response that our nation needs. And frankly, our National Command Authorities expect.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was incredible. So 3 different deployments and all different. So I got to really kind of lucky. So RAF Fairford was the first one. And we can't talk about before they happen, but you can talk about it afterwards, right? And you see this stuff on the news. So we were at RAF Fairford. That's an incredible community, big aviation enthusiasts, obviously, you see them and you see their air show that they have at Riyadh. But they were just very welcoming of us, very excited about air power. But I think while we were there, we worked with 14 different allied partner nations as well around Europe and even the Middle East from there. And then the second one was to Morón, Spain. Again, great community, appreciative of us. We got to work with their Eurofighters down there and then also fly around the globe. Yeah, incredible community down there too. And then the third one, to Misawa Air Base, Japan, which is, again, a great location and probably my favorite location out in that theater for us. And actually, General Armagas got to come visit us out there and see that. But you have the U.S. Vipers, you have the Japanese F-35s. We got to fly with the South Koreans and then all the different contested areas to the south of us as well. So incredible deployment as well.
So the B-1 inventory is small. We talked about this, but the nation asks a lot from you and the jets. Talk to us about how the tempo, the pace, the demand impacts you as a community, impacts the jets, given, that you're, again, high demand, small, low density.
Very difficult, right? And it's all relative. So, the B-2 guys would laugh at us because, hey, we're really the small fleet, right? But, but it's all relative. And without getting into it too much, I think it's an example of not recapitalizing the fleet. And so when I was young in the jet, they told us, hey, there were supposed to be 400 B-1s to replace the B-52s, right? And as a nation, we chose to buy 100. And then probably soon before I got to the community, they had downsized from 100. There used to be at Mountain Home and places like that down in Georgia. And then they were at, 60 or so. That creates a difficulty, right? Because with less jets, obviously there's less jets to choose to fly, and that becomes a maintenance challenge for sure.
You burn them up. I mean, the less jets you have, yet the demand is increasing.
Yep.
If it was steady state, you'd still have to fly those jets more often, so you'd be putting more hours on them. And but then when you increase the demand, as we have, and the demand for bombers is only going up, you burn those jets out even faster. And the air crew experience the same dynamics, right?
That's right. Yep. Yeah, and obviously they, like we talked about before, how the jet was designed, and it was an incredible design and very capable. A supersonic bomber that can roll.
Oh yeah, it is
drop
badass.
24 2,000-pound bombs, right? I'm not trying to brag about it. It's like those engineers were wise beyond their years, if you will. But
we didn't use them the way they were designed to use them.
That's
so
right.
That put unusual stresses on the wing boxes, on the wings themselves, because you're doing these, long duration sorties in the desert with your wings spread out because you're having to fly at max endurance.
That's right.
And so it's just aging the airplanes in ways that they were not designed for.
That's actually right. Yeah, and again, they were designed to sit nuclear alert on the ground. I think the initial design was 5,000 hours, right? Well, that doesn't last very long if you're going to do decades of CAS and other even global power stuff.
You can't amortize that or spread that across a large fleet.
That's right. Yep. So lower density. And then that also means, we can only carry so many crews because we need each crew to fly a certain amount. And so decrementing the force meant less crews, which meant less experience overall. And then that happened again fairly recently. And so, we're kind of going the wrong direction there in terms of growing the force and the challenge that comes with that because you only have so many training slots and things like that.
Yeah. So talk to us more about that from a personnel side, because we talk about this a lot on the Aerospace Advantage, but the personnel, it's the warfighters that really are that combat edge. We've got to have the new technology, the advanced technology, but it's the unique elements of the human capital, our talent, the warfighters themselves, and how their expertise, their creativity, their innovation, their courage, that really makes a difference. How does a small size and how that's constrained your training pipeline impacted your community, both from a pilot side as well as from a maintainer side?
Great. Yeah. So we're obviously going to be funded based on the number of jets, right? That's why we're all there. And so that does create a smaller component of both aviators and maintenance.
Yeah. When you divest aircraft, you divest people too.
That's right.
And it's not just the pilots. It's everything that's associated with the flying operation, from the intel folks to a lot of the enlisted troops in the ops side, but definitely the maintainers, supply, logistics, all of that. All that gets divested when you let a jet go.
Yep. Yeah, so it creates really, I would say, just less margins and less capability. And what I mean by that is any given day, someone might get sick or have to go to squadron officer school or whatever, right? Or a jet goes hard down because some unforeseen thing happened or just depot maintenance or regular upgrades. And the B-1s had a lot of upgrades too, which creates more downtime on the jet, but more capable force. That just gives us less to work with overall. It's like you save money by shopping at Costco, right? There's a lot of goods you kind of buy in bulk when buying smaller things. And it's created an issue on the maintenance side too, because as the jet ages, and frankly, as the Air Force signals that the B-1's going to retire, a small mom and pop that was maybe making a part for the jet, there's no business case there. And, who can blame them? And so when I ask for 10,000 of something, there's probably a business case. But if I ask for 50 or 10, maybe
or
not.
they're seeing the writing on the wall and they're like, yeah, the Air Force is going to divest this week. You need to move to the next thing. You end up with the diminished manufacturing sources, so DMS.
Right.
So those are the parts and repairs that you're not going to be able to get anymore because they simply aren't made anymore. So the Air Force has a program. Well, they'll go in and they'll try to buy up everything when they know that the manufacturing source is departing. But it's really problematic because then the Air Force says, we're getting rid of the B-1s next year, or A-10s or whatever. But then they end up having to retain them within the force for years and even decades, long after they plan to get rid of them. So this stresses that DMS sustainment issue even more.
Oh, for sure.
It has a serious impact on MC rates, mission capable rates.
Yeah, and absolute patriots that have innovated through that, and given us the capability that we do have. There's a really cool thing they started.
Our maintainers are definitely the unsung heroes of the entire Air Force.
Oh, 100%. And really the whole institution that is that. There's the frontline crew chiefs and maintainers that I work with every day, and God bless those men and women for sure. But there's even, Tinker and the depot level and the engineers. And there's a new technology they brought to Dyess called cold spray. And I don't totally understand it, but I think of it like 3D printing, kind of for metal. And so it's a way that, this part doesn't exist anymore. We can't source it, right? It's just things are too old and we ran out of parts. So how do we kind of create a part on site?
Which is amazing because when you're talking about metal parts, you really have to take a look at the grain structure to ensure the integrity of the part is going to be able to withstand the stresses that it's put under. You can't just print out, willy-nilly in your garage, metal parts and pieces. That's just not how metal works.
Right.
So to maintain the crystalline structure, integrity, and strength, that's some serious magic and beauty there.
It is. And I'm here to tell you it works because, we're flying them, so it worked out great.
Manage your money on your time with 24/7 digital banking on the PenFed mobile app. Easily make payments, transfer funds, and deposit checks through mobile deposit.
That's music to my ears.
Learn more at penfed.org. Federally insured by NCOA.
Okay, so we've been sort of dancing around it, but just give us a good point, right? The B-1 epitomizes the challenge the Air Force has faced for the last 3 decades in terms of resource constraints, sustained high ops tempo, deferred modernization, and this all drives a capacity decline because the force was prematurely divested. Would you mind going over that history? Because it really is a cautionary tale that we're seeing across the other fleets as well.
Sure. So divest to invest, right? Really, it kind of creates a vicious cycle in certainly in a negative way, because as you decrease the number of airplanes, you decrease the number of people, now you have fewer to go from there. And so now we're at a point in our bomber fleet, again, certainly the combatant commanders, insatiable demand for them, which is great and shows the power of the bomber, but there's not enough to go around. And so that has to get limited. Where that really becomes tricky is now to increase capacity for things like conflict or competition with China becomes very difficult to do, right? And we're certainly working on it. It's not that we're not capable, it's a capacity really conversation or a transition to things like the B-21. Midnight Hammer, again, great example, but they talk about it being a raid, right? Our ability to do that again and again and again, which we historically have had to do. Things like World War II and Korea and Vietnam.
If you're talking protracted conflict, you need to be able to wage that campaign and sustained campaign, not a one-time punishment strike.
That's right. Yep. And so you, again, as the cycle kind of continues, it just becomes, you have less and less options as a leader, certainly as a combatant commander. What do you do with that capacity? How do you grow that force? The Air Force has suffered from a 2,000 pilot shortage for probably my whole career. It's very difficult to get out of that because the less people you have to then grow. And so it kind of works against you.
Yeah, and the less aircraft you have, the less aircraft cockpits there are to be able to absorb and experience and train those new pilots that are coming in. So it takes them longer to experience, which means it takes them longer to upgrade and become an instructor pilot, which then constrains your ability to absorb and bring in and train the new pilots that are coming out of the pilot training pipeline.
That's right.
So it is just this, it's a deleterious cycle. It's a vicious cycle that we've got to be able to get out of. And it's going to take us buying airplanes to be able to do that.
Yeah. And again, it's been kind of a slow reduction, if you will, because again, during my career, I just saw the retirement of 17 B-1s, right? But when I talk to people like yourself and Gonzo and realize that at the end of the Cold War to now, we have 1/3 the bombers that we did.
I know.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
And they're the same bombers. It's not like we've got new ones that carry more bombs or whatever, right? So it's like, wow, that's an incredible stat to just understand the decrease in capacity. Again, the men and women, I've seen no better, and it was a pleasure to lead them. They know what they're doing. They're very capable. They're highly trained. And the airplane, it's evolved. The B-1 today is more capable than it's ever been, but it's still a invention of the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can do with that old. If you had a cell phone that didn't exist, but if you had a computer or other technology from the 80s, right?
You'd be using punch cards,
Yeah,
right?
my mom had a car phone, but if you tried to upgrade that, at some point you kind of get to the point of diminishing returns.
Well, because
right?
you can't do the tech insertion.
Right.
I mean, because to be able to get, for example, the central processor can become so invasive that you just simply cannot, or you might not necessarily have the swap C, the size, weight, power, and cooling. I think that the B-1 probably doesn't have a huge problem with that, given how awesome your engines are. But there is a tech insertion problem where then you used to say, hey, look, in order to be able to bring the newest, best technologies and sensors and avionics and capabilities, we need to have a whole new platform. But let's stop for a moment and talk about how the B-1 has evolved from your time in service, how you've seen it, where it was and where it is today in the modernization program, because it is an incredibly capable platform. And I know, back in my day, I even saw the F-16. It was not your granddaddy's F-16. It was not Papa's and Guns. It was an all-weather. It was just an incredibly capable fighter. And the B-1 has a similar story.
Absolutely, yeah, and sort of a misnomer, right? Because people think of a jet, like the B-1B, like there's only been a B, and so it must be the same, and certainly not. And that's true of a lot.
Yeah, in history, because the B-1A was the Carter administration. That was
right.
the original design. And so then they, when Reagan resurrected that program, it had been killed, it became the B-1B, because they downgraded some of the requirements for speed and so forth.
Yeah.
But
and they
still,
sort of changed it, right? Because initially they thinking, okay, we're going to go high and fast. And then it became, the only way to survive these threats is to go low, right? And so the B-2 and the B-1, both initially designed to go low. And so it changed some things, and that's why it is what it is today. But what they did still is block.
Which is awesome.
It's a lot of fun. And it's a way to get under threats, for sure. But in terms of the capabilities, right, they had block upgrades at first, and then we switched to sustainment blocks. And so really, throughout my time, flying the jet was mainly sustainment blocks. And so they did things like line of sight link 16, certainly targeting pod and JDAM like we talked about. Our standoff weapons, JASM and LRASM, right? We're the largest conventional payload capable asset in the
inventory, U.S.
in the inventory, right? 24 2,000-pound bombs. That creates a lot of capability. So being able to do JASM or LRASM, right? That's obviously a very long-range weapon with a lot of capability. And so things like maritime strike, obviously we're first and foremost as part of that mission set. But really the evolution from the blocks gave us things like line of sight link 16 and other digital capabilities, gave us glass displays, the targeting pod now fully integrated in the jet. And so it's a totally different jet than maybe someone who initially flew it. And its ability to integrate, not just within a formation of B-1s, but within a larger strike package with the allied nations and our U.S. assets as well, is incredible and way, way better and different than even when I grew up in the jet. We used to go to Red Flag, and I'm sitting there with paper and writing down like, okay, that's where the enemy fighters are, and that's where. And now I can just see it on my
screen. Pulling out your chart and trying to find the lat longs or the mergs or whatever. Yeah.
And that was, in the 2010s. So it certainly evolved even from that, and really, really capable. So it's really a story of innovation and capability. You can only add so much to these older aircraft, but they certainly have, and that's what we have for now. And so the ability to sustain and modernize them is very important and something they have been doing. And so that's a great news story.
Well, very important. Yeah, it's a totally good news story, because as far as I'm concerned, ensuring that the young men and women who are going to put their lives at risk by going into bad guy land and doing the mission, it is our moral obligation to ensure that you have the capabilities you need to do that successfully and come home safely. And ultimately, that's going to mean accelerating B-21 to the fleet. But in the meantime, Air Force leadership is really emphasizing restoring readiness. And that's something that is music to our ears here at Mitchell, because it is hugely important. What does that mean to the B-1 community? How do they restore readiness, and what are their main challenges?
I think I would make three main points on that. Okay, so number one would be on the kind of modernization, capability enhancement side. And that's not traditionally readiness, but it can kind of be a force multiplier, right? So especially with heavy aircraft like bombers, mobility as well, but you talked about swap C, right? Because of the power and the cooling on the jet, and just frankly the size. I mean, the B-1 is mainly just fuel bombs and avionics. But there's not a lot of space for us despite its appearances. So the ability to put technology on is there. And that may be the bridging solution. That may be, the best that we have to fight for the next however many years to enhance some of those capabilities. That would increase readiness and increase training. The other one is just increasing things like WSS accounts, right?
Yeah, the weapon system sustainment. So spares and repairs, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, that's a challenge for older aircraft because, again, some of it's not even a money problem. It's just that these parts don't exist, right?
Yeah.
So do I start up a program? Certainly with unlimited money, you can do lots of things, but how do I reasonably create a program to source the parts that I need? Do those parts exist? And how long am I going to invest in this, the airframe structure, all those things that Global Strike has certainly looked at as they look at the future for us. And I won't speak for them on those decisions and what their plans are, but that's a way to do it too, right? How do you increase the hours as well as the quality of the training? Right. So making our ranges better, more capable, certainly something that I know the Air Force is looking at. Things like advanced simulation, right?
Yep.
Things like JSE in a box and things like that you've had on this podcast to discuss are very important as well to enhance the quality, right? Because if I can only fly so many hours on the jet due to whatever limitation, airframe life or parts or whatever, and I can try to work on that some, but I can also increase the quality of the training of the hours that I do get and then substitute some other of those hours in things like advanced simulation. I think that's the best kind of combination that you're going to have right now.
No, I think that you outlined that really nicely because there's a limitation in how much the aircraft can fly. And there's also a limitation on the range. And the ranges, it's not just about, how advanced they are, because we know that our ranges are old. And when we talk about that, it's really about our ability to simulate realistic threats in the open air. But because we have so few ranges nowadays, whether or not that's air-to-ground ranges or even sort of the air-to-air MOAs and our ability to operate there because of the National Air Traffic System is becoming so congested, there's a limit to the throughput and what we can do within those ranges, as well as the types of training that we can do in those ranges that we're willing to allow to have open air, which is then why you would complement that with the advanced simulation. But we don't have that JSC in the box deployed to every squadron yet.
Right.
And that, I think, is another imperative to be able to make that happen.
Agreed. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a hybrid solution, I think, going forward. Fly as many hours as we can.
Because nothing substitutes for, being
Right.
in the jet and actually flying real sorties.
Yeah, and that was always the debate, like, oh, you're going to sim, we're going to fly less. Like, no, you need to do both, but there is a reasonableness to how many hours I'm going to put in the airframe, what are the capabilities there, what's that quality of training vice the quality. If you get a, no kidding, advanced simulator like you're talking about, something like JSE offers now, as well as, the signaling part of it that we don't always talk about, but maybe if I'm training for something high end, and I'm kind of writing about this right now, if you're training for something that's high end, you don't want to tip your hat to the enemy. Maybe you don't want the adversary to observe what you're doing. You do that in an advanced simulated environment, then no
They're
one's
not
the
prepared.
wiser, right?
Yeah.
And so there's an advantage there as well.
And certainly the being able to exercise with the war reserve modes, and that's something that, for example, that I never got to do in the F-16 because we did not have advanced simulation. That, for our war reserve modes, it was really just like, don't worry, trust us. But we never had the ability to train in that kind of contested environment where we would need to be able to utilize that. So we were just kind of hoping it would work out, but we didn't know how we would have to compensate or how that would impact our tactics or what to expect. And so absolutely agree. So what you're talking about is also sort of that old reveal and conceal. How much do we reveal and what do we need to conceal?
Absolutely. We can be intentional about it, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to reveal something just to force our hand to train that way. So, you and I can fly together and do advanced war modes, but we might want to, right? It gives us options there.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah. So given your experience in the B-1, how does that shape your thinking about on-ramping the B-21? So clearly we need to avoid some of the pitfalls of another generation of bomber inventory that's in high demand, low density. We need to ensure that the entire buy is aligned with the real world demand. How would you envision doing that? I know I've got my own theory of the case, right?
Yeah. So first of all, B-21, everything appears to be an incredible platform. The next generation, right? They're calling it 6th gen, which they don't really describe for bombers, but modern technology and everything that can then bring to bear for that. So that's incredible and that's great. I would look at the kind of historical cautionary tale, if you will. Again, the sort of negative trend that I see where we're not replacing our bombers in the sufficient quantities. And so you end up with multiple different MDSs out there, right? Major weapon systems, while also not having enough of them. And so that trend from 400 B-52s to 100 B-1s, and that's degraded now only 20 B-2s, that's a negative slope. So I would say we can't avoid that trend, right? Because that would be like 3 B-21s. And then how do you transition, communities to it because it is a whole new platform, probably most like the B-2 community and a similar, flying wing design and certainly LO and nuclear capable. But there's a lot of different components of all the different bombers, bomber mission sets, and experience that's going to go into that. And so really, I think, number one, getting all three communities involved in the stand-up and kind of employment of the B-21 will be important. And they're doing that now, so that's great. Places like the B-1 community transitioning to LO and a nuclear mission will be a totally paradigm-shifting event for sure. There obviously used to be nuclear-capable assets at those bases and on that aircraft, but that's so far away. That's generations ago. And so having to relearn that will be really important. But a lot of the elements that the B-1 does bring in terms of the agility and flexibility, I think will be important to the next bomber and to the next set of missions that we might have to do.
Yeah. And, just from major muscle movements, what I would do, is I look forward to that, not just from the manpower and expertise that you're talking about bringing to the B-21 is field the B-21, start building that up, but do not divest any other bombers until we have at least fully mission capability for the B-21, which is going to be more than just one squadron, by the way. That's an IOC as far as I'm concerned. We've got to build up the B-21 community before we begin even thinking about divesting some of the other bombers, because we have to, in my mind, increase the number of bombers that we have that we're able to field because we are too small for what the global security environment demands. Okay, so thanks for my PSA, right? Public service announcement regarding B-21 and fleet management. But, so getting back to what you mentioned regarding expertise, how is your community evolving to on-ramp this new capability? I mean, the fact that you're going from non-stealth to stealth and one that's 6th gen, and got it, they're not like the same 6th gens or generations in bombers, but we're talking about a suite of capabilities is really what's defining 6th gen. That's got to involve a lot of changes. For sure. And so, again, I'm not an expert on the B-21, certainly compared to those that are and can speak better to it, but they obviously have the operational test squadron and, they announced the flight of the second aircraft. And so that's at least doubling, right? I would imagine the number of tests they can do. That's important. They started something called the B-21 Farm Team. And so I got to nominate some people for that. Really good. And that basically gets aviators from all three communities, B-2, B-52, and B-1, to get exposed to the B-21 and do things like the simulator and get capability briefs and things like that to try to get, again, very talented people from all the communities into that community to understand, okay, what are its requirements, but what are kind of the best practices that we can bring to the capabilities that exist? How do we change things if we need to from there? And then on the base infrastructure side, Ellsworth Air Force Base is the furthest ahead for sure. They started their construction years ago. And if you go up there and look, it's not the base that it was 5 years ago. It's a major renovation in terms of all kinds of facilities. Obviously, for the requirements of that aircraft, like we said, all the different capabilities that are there from LO and 6th gen and nuclear capable and all those things. So it's creating a real MILCON investment for that. And that's now starting at Dyess as well. And so as that continues, that staying on track will enable the jets to be able to be delivered to a base that's ready to receive them and use those capabilities on that good timeline. That's exciting. So I'm sure you keep in touch with your bros that are on the farm team. Yeah. Are they excited? Oh, yeah. No, it's an incredible experience, and they really get excited about it. They even, as they survey them, hey, what do you think about the Air Force, and what's your desire to stay in? And people that go on that farm team, it's something like doubles their retention, intent, because they're just so excited, right? It's easy to get lost in, maybe I'm flying an older aircraft, or maybe, I don't know what the future holds for the military. Well, the military and the Air Force it is on a great path in the sense of things like the B-21, the F-35, maybe F-47, like CCA. There's a lot of great technology coming, but a lot of people sitting in their foxhole don't see that or realize that, right? Yeah. And so things like this podcast are great to expose those issues for sure. But those people that thought, hey, I'll just be in the B-1 until it retires, then maybe I won't have a job, which is silly, of course. But, sometimes that's a perspective, getting exposed that, no, here's the future. You're part of it. This is how exciting it is. This is what it brings to the nation and how you're part of that, contributing to that national security. It gives them purpose. Cool. It reinvigorates the mission, and it actually makes our warfighters feel valued. Yeah, and you talk about, quality of life or reward of service, right?
again, if I drove a car from 1985 forever, and some days it didn't start, some days it did, and like that becomes challenging. That becomes
it makes you feel like you're not valued, like you're not important because you're not giving the resources that you need to go face the evolving threat.
It just becomes a challenge. They want equipment that works on time and well, integrates with other capabilities that they can bring to bear on the adversary, because they want to serve and they want to do that mission for their nation.
It's exciting to hear that the farm team increases retention.
Yeah.
That's I think that I would offer to Air Force leaders that is I think a good tell for how we can improve retention of our warfighters, because they are our greatest asset. Okay, thank you for the conversation. We're coming quite tight on time. Thank you for this morning. Where would you want to see the bomber community in 10 years? So if you're grading our homework, what does good look like in 10 years?
I think a good study on the true capacity that the combatant commanders in the nation needs, and then an on-ramp to get there. And by on-ramp, that's going to be a combination, like you said, of how do we maintain the capacity in the most effective and efficient way now? What's that going to look like to keep assets, if we require them, as we on-ramp production of the B-21 that's already occurring? So get that capacity right, and then work back from that target in terms of the human capital that we talked about, right? So if that capacity is exceedingly higher than it is now, which I get the sense it is, but there's other people doing the studies as well. What is that capacity? How do we get there? Not just from a production of the aircraft standpoint, but what a lot of people forget about, but you brought up, is the human capital part. How do we grow our aviators? How do we grow our maintainers? All the different support infrastructure that's required in place to put that there. And then what does that look like in terms of operating concepts, whether that's bomber task forces, continuous bomber presence, all the way through, executing plans of the nation to, go perform or go contribute to some of these campaigns as we're asked to do, right? The O plans, if you will, is going to be an important part of that. So that really whole conversation needs to happen. I'm happy to tell you it is happening, I believe. I just hope that we get it right, and then the decision makers listen and we stay committed, because there's been decisions made before and requirements set, right? You said it yesterday, the F-22 requirement was 700 and some.
750.
So
we ended up with,
smart people made those decisions, right? I don't think that threat went away. The requirement stayed. Then we made a different decision. And so that's my hope, is that whatever that number is, whatever that capacity is, we kind of stay the course. Because if you don't get the bomber capacity right, again, they're the bombers for the whole free world. And so we can't afford to get it wrong.
And I think recent operations have demonstrated just how integral the bombers are to our ability to project power and pursue our nation's interests. Duke, thank you so much. It's been a phenomenal conversation. We have so much more to talk about, so we look forward to having you back on the Aerospace Advantage.
Thanks for having me. It was a fun time.
And with that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's conversation. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to you, our listeners, for your continued support and for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that like button or follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas that you would like us to explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on X, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great aerospace power kind of day. See you next time.